All right, welcome to our penultimate lecture this season on the Diamond Sutra. Next week will be the last week we'll be meeting, so be sure to invite your friends. We're looking at chapter 16, and I'm just going to talk about a few of the things that stand out to me. There's so much really profound and really subtle stuff going on in these next three chapters that it's just the three chapters themselves would be a whole season's worth of discussion. So be sure to take a look at it yourself and reflect upon what's going on. And you can practice summarizing it to yourself, like what's the important point here, and just write it out and ask yourself, what's the bigger picture? What's the overall thing that's happening here? Because part of the issue with this, with Daehaeng Kunsim's translation of the Diamond Sutra, is that it's a discussion between two enlightened people, between Subhuti and the Buddha. And so they're already talking at a very profound level. And sometimes it's not immediately obvious why the Buddha is saying the things he is. You can kind of guess at why Subhuti is talking about things, but the Buddha is speaking for a reason. There's something going on that he's picking up on that needs to be said. And sometimes you kind of have to try to look at it from a bigger perspective and just ask yourself what it is. Don't try to force a perspective on things, but just leave yourself open to a perspective. And then reflect upon that, but again, don't be too attached to that as well, because there's lots of layers going on here. And if you cling too tightly to one layer, it prevents you from seeing other layers. So the title on this one is, Anyone Who Can Thoroughly Do This Will Free Themselves from the Chains of Karma. Well, what's this? This could be everything that's happened up until now, right? It could be chapter 15, but it could also apply to the contents of chapter 16 as well. And to me, it's anyone who can thoroughly put these teachings into practice will free themselves from the chains of karma. And if I'm wrong, I'm not wrong by much. Either one leaves you in a good place. All right, let's go ahead and I'll skip around a little bit, but to begin with, I'll start on page 179. I'll go ahead and read it. Subhuti, among those women and men who are diligently putting into practice these teachings of flowing emptiness, there are some who, nonetheless, experience humiliation and abuse at the hands of others. However, know that this is due to the karma of past lives, which would have otherwise caused them to fall into evil paths. Further, because they have experienced those things here now, and can apply these teachings to their hardships, that harmful karma from generations past will soon fade away. Doing so, such practitioners will, without a doubt, attain unsurpassed, utterly profound enlightenment. This is it reminds me a bit of what we saw in the previous chapter about how the Buddha said even when his flesh was being torn to ribbons, he understood that this was still coming from his inner true self. And if he had looked at it in terms of outside causes, he would have fallen into hatred, into resentment, into anger. And it's not, like I said, it's not dissimilar from what's happening here. And if you think about traditional translations of the Diamond Sutra, this part is usually translated as something along the lines of, anyone who even recites this will experience this wonderful merit and virtue. Well, okay, but so then why do people still suffer? And here what Kunsim is saying, well, it's sort of like it's like a computer, or it's like, first in line is first out. So you may have good karma, but whatever you've still got in the pipeline, unless you're really worked at learning to dissolve that, that's still happening. That's still coming. And so, the stuff we've done in the past, and there's so many ways we could do harmful things without particularly intending to. Sometimes probably everybody has met somebody who's got so much energy that they don't even notice that they offend other people, right? They just run over people like they were speed bumps. And the worst part is they don't notice they've done it. They have so much energy that if something like that happens to them, they don't care. It's like, yeah, okay, whatever. They don't realize that other people don't feel the same way, that it's a bigger deal for other people. And so just, even little stuff like that, you can wind up causing a lot of harm and a lot of resentment with other people. But the interesting thing here is that she says that in other circumstances, this karma would have caused you to fall into evil paths. Well, one of the evil path that comes to my mind right off the top is revenge, right? You're going to get yours. You're on the list. This kind of stuff. Any chance you get to get back at them, or this kind of hatred or despising other people. But where does that end, right? If somebody offends me or causes me harm without realizing it, and I try to strike back at them, then now they may be like, I didn't do anything to this guy. Why does he hate me all of a sudden? And now they start thinking the same way. And just life after life after life of this dissatisfied urge prolonging itself again and again and again. And, there's such a better idea to be free of that. And then there's a whole issue of, I would call it mistaken values, where if somebody suffers, they mistakenly attribute the cause of their suffering, right? Oh, if only I'd had more money. If only I'd been somebody powerful enough that somebody couldn't have bothered me. And I suppose these kinds of thoughts are the most insidious when we're young. They get in our minds without even realizing it. Oh, more money was the solution, or more power was the solution, or a bigger body, or a stronger body, or a certain kind of disposition. That was the right answer. And so without realizing it, we can get stuck chasing that kind of stuff. And it's, I sort of want to call it childish, because it's the stuff that we create without an adult's reflection, without an adult's brain power to analyze what's going on. Or just kind of, oh, you hurt me, I'm going to hurt you back, or I'm going to be so strong you can't do anything to me. And so, it's the stuff of tragedy in novels, but, somebody spends their life chasing after that kind of stuff. And, talk about a mistaken path. Let's see. Well, here's an ugly one, but it's passing along your suffering to other people, right? If we don't know how to dissolve our suffering, if we don't know how to dissolve our hardships, then a lot of times what we try to do, we try to find a way to endure it. Right? We try to just cope as best we can. But the problem is that a lot of times, the English expression is the abusees become the abusers. And it's you think it shouldn't happen, right? You think the victim, having experienced this, should know better than to perpetrate it on somebody else. But if you look at people who abuse others, a lot of times they themselves were abused. And I think in part, there's a karma aspect that I can't speak to exactly what's going on there. But there's also the psychologically, that's what they know, right? If somebody grew up in a very abusive home, in their child's mind, that's the shape that love took, right? It's a very twisted version that, somebody who grew up in a more healthy home wouldn't recognize, but that's what home feels like to them. So that kind of abusive behavior, that sort of twisted, harsh behavior, that's just what they know. And especially when you get pushed into a lot of stress, that's how you tend to respond. And so, the things that talk about evil paths, because that continues, right? If you abuse other people, if you, physically or emotionally or however, but if you abuse other people, then there's a good chance that some of those people are going to abuse more people. And it just grows exponentially. And so part of the hope of this paragraph is that you can put a stop to that stuff. You can say, no, this energy that keeps rolling along underneath everything, no, stop. Just stop. And let's dissolve that. Let's turn that around. Let's learn to entrust it to our foundation. And let's turn that into something more positive and creative and healthy that leaves people better off. And so instead of a negative cycle, instead of a negative exponential, you can actually start a positive exponential. And I know when Kyobo Sunim talks about, unlimited virtue and merit, that's not exactly what she's talking about. But at the same time, that's a really good thing. Okay. Let's take a look at page 183. This is another interesting idea that we've seen before. So I'll go ahead and read it. Thus, if someone passing through the future should arrive at a today that is an utterly degenerate age, a world-ending age, know that even those are just words and labels. If such a person should treasure this non-dual energy, trying to rely upon their inherent foundation as well as learning from the teachings, seeing both of these paths as one, engraving the essence of these in their heart and reflecting upon it, reciting these teachings as one mind, letting go of all discriminations, then their actions, just as they are, will all be virtue and merit. This idea that no matter where you go, there are people who treasure this non-dual energy. There are people who are naturally attracted to this non-dual energy. Because, to put it over perhaps simply, this is the whole. This is what we're part of. This is the fundamental essence of reality. So in a way, it's very natural that someone should be attracted to this non-dual energy. We might say one mind. And so, Kyobo Sunim keeps repeating this throughout here, that no matter where you are, no matter, it's funny if you read old Buddhist texts, and almost every In every generation, you can find a famous Buddhist text or a record of somebody's teachings. And they'll say, oh, in this degenerate age, this is the end of the world. People don't know anything nowadays. Everything's gone to hell. And it was written like 1,000 years ago, or 2,000 years ago. And it's just kind of funny. It's like every generation complains about the previous generation's music and hairstyles. And it's kind of the same thing. But so no matter where you find yourself, no matter how desperate or dry the situation may, emotionally or spiritually dry the situation may seem, there's still people out there who are attracted to this fundamental non-duality, who, even if they can't put a label on it, they're like, this is right. This is how we should be doing things. And so we've seen that repeated several times, and it's interesting that the sutra keeps making that point over and over and over again. And sometimes I wonder if this has something to do with the idea that when the Buddha first awakened, his first instinct was not to teach anybody, because his first thought was, how can anybody understand what I'm talking about? He looked around, the first people he met, and he's just like, these guys just don't get it. I should just go live quietly and not stress myself out over this. And then he was walking along and he saw lotuses blooming in a pond. And some of the lotuses were actually blooming under the water. Some were blooming right at the water level. And some were blooming, came out quite a ways out of the water before they bloomed. And so he saw that and he realized, okay, there'll always be some people who just don't get it. But there'll be, people have different capacities. So there'll always be some people who understand this. And in some of the early sutras, there's a description of a type of Buddha who doesn't teach anybody. And it's like an awakened person who didn't quite go far enough. They didn't quite go into non-duality as far as they should have, where they understood non-duality. Maybe they understood non-duality in the sense of themselves, but they didn't quite pick up on the connection with other people, and that other people need to know this too. And so that may be why the Buddha is talking about this. That even though you try to teach this sutra to other people, even though you try to teach it to the lives in your body first, and share it as you can with other people, but there'll always be somebody somewhere who was like, oh, right, that was the piece I needed. Okay. The last part I wanted to look at today was the last paragraph on page 187, or the second paragraph as well. So, but know this, Subhuti, these teachings have arisen from this non-dual one mind, and so cannot be known through thoughts and theories, nor can thoughts fathom what realizing this essence brings to fruition, or the terrible results of denying or ignoring this underlying truth of non-dual emptiness. This was a little bit tricky one to translate, and we kind of had to split the idea up into two separate statements. But the first, the first half of the last statement is you can't fathom, you can't perceive how much help putting into practice the teachings of non-duality, what realizing this truth of non-duality brings. You think you understand, but you don't. It's there. My level of understanding is here, but there's a whole nother level of existence that it affects and it benefits. So on the one hand, there's that, but on the other hand, it's just a tiny word in Korean, Kyobo. It kind of sort of implies bad karma. It's not necessarily, because in English we use the word karma. Oh, there's karma between us, or there, it drives Koreans nuts because they're like, no, that word's Anyang. That's karmic affinity. That's not karma. There's good karma and there's words for bad karma. But here the nuance is slightly negative, and the nuance is in the negative. But what I think it means is it's the effects, the horrible effects of denying this truth of non-duality, of ignoring this underlying truth of non-duality. Any country or land that is about to have a really bad time historically, there's this idea that this other group of people isn't people. They are heretics, they're demons, they're subhumans, whatever. And that's how it tends to start. And well, they're not really humans, so we can do whatever we want to them. Or they're not humans, so we should throw them off our land. Or they're, this kind of thing. And it, sooner or later, it always comes back on the people who started that, right? Whether you're, historically, regardless of whatever land you start out in, it always comes back in a bad form. You can look at Nazi Germany and say, oh, the Slavs are subhuman, right? And you can see how that worked out for Germany. It didn't work out very good. You can look at North America, the US, and the treatment of the Native Americans. And you might say, well, nothing really bad happened to America. Well, then you see the Civil War, right? And you see things like epidemics, big epidemics. 20, 30,000 people in an area dying from yellow fever or typhus or different kinds of diseases. And it just pops up out of nowhere and just wipes out a big chunk of people. And is that unrelated to these previous actions? Maybe not. It's hard to say, but I have my suspicions. So it's definitely not a good thing. If you start with the whole basis of this sutra is that we are all interconnected. We're all part of one whole. If we're interconnected, then essentially we are sharing the same life. We're sharing the same body. We're sharing the same mind. And if you and I are sharing the same mind, the same body, the same life, and I try to destroy you, I try to cut you off, I've just chopped off a chunk of my being, right? Nowhere does chopping off parts of your body work out particularly good, right? That's not a pleasant thing. And there's I talked about it 2 or 3 lectures ago, I think. But when we talk about the precepts, one of the things about keeping the precepts is that the moment I make a decision to keep the precepts, not lying, not stealing, not killing, not engaging in improper sexual behavior or addictive behaviors and intoxicants, it doesn't matter whether anybody sees that or not. The moment I make a decision, this is what I want to do, all the lives in my body, all the cells and smaller stuff than cells and organs, it's like they're all aware of that decision. I've taught them this is how to behave. Oh, it's okay to cut corners. It's okay to cheat people a little bit. It's okay to steal from people if nobody notices. It's okay to take advantage of other people. Well, that's all fun when it's happening to somebody else. Most people don't think it's fun when it's happening to them. And if I've taught everything that makes up my physical existence, that this is how they can act, then I'm the one who's going to suffer from that pain. Right? I'm the one who's going to suffer from that discomfort. So when we talk about what applying this essence of non-duality means, I can only even guess at all the possible implications, but it just starts with the very cells that make up your body and moves on from there. And one of the things Daehaeng said a number of times, well, more than that, is that we're all together with the living and the dead. And likewise, she said, we gather together like with like. And she used the example of, if you look at the store, the oranges are always put with oranges, the apples are put with apples. Fishermen like to hang out with other fishermen. Artists like to hang out with other artists, and so on and so on and so on. And people just kind of gather together naturally according to those who have the most affinity with them. Well, if I have kind, non-dual affinity, that's the people that I'm naturally going to be attracted to, and those are the people mostly who are going to be attracted to me, or going to be drawn to my life. Whereas if I'm treating other people disparagingly, if I'm looking down on other people, if I'm treating them as not having worth or value, that's the kind of people who wind up in my life, and I get treated that way. So it's a hard road to go down. So better not to go down that direction. All right. So I'll go ahead and stop here for chapter 16. But like I said before, try to reflect on this and ask yourself, where can I apply this? Where am I applying this in my life? Where can I do better in my life? And when we find ourselves looking down on other people, when we find ourselves disparaging other people, start with that and try to let go of that. And sometimes even try to turn that around positively. It may be fine not to trust somebody, right? We have to know our own capacity, and we have to know other people's capacity. And it's like, this guy will steal anything that's not nailed down, right? So I'm going to hope things work out better for him, but I'm not going to let him run my store. That's just a recipe for disaster. Or this person has multiple drunk driving arrests. She doesn't get to drive the school bus. That's wisdom. You don't have to hate them, but you do need to be aware of capacity. You do need to take that into account. Kunsim said numerous times, we're all born with good judgment. So put that into practice as well. Thank you very much.